Hi everybody, Keith Tanner here from Flyin Miata, and today I'm going to be talking about the Flyin Miata turbo system for the NA and NB Miata. Now this is just one of a video of this whole series of videos that we do. We post at least one a week, so if you like this kind of content, please make sure to subscribe to our channel, like our channel, throw comments in there because we love having comments. That helps drive our content, and we do read every comment and we respond to as many of them as we can. So please, the more you talk to us, the more we can talk to you, and the better content we can provide. So today, as I said, talking about the NA/NB turbo system from Flyin Miata. Now this is going to be a sort of an overview of the whole kit, the whole system, because we've never really talked about it. It's one of those things that's been around for a long time. Turbo systems are effectively what started the whole Flyin Miata business. But you know, it's one of those things that's been around, so we haven't talked about it. So today I'm just going to go over the whole system, what sort of sets it apart, what you might want to know about it, answer whatever questions you might have. Again, if you have questions, put them in the comments. We'll answer them live, or we'll answer them in the comments, and also give you a feel of what's going on. Also, I know there's a bunch of you interested in the NC Turbo. There's one of the mules right behind me right now. The other test mule has actually just come back from calibration in Michigan. I was driving it down to lunch today. Fantastic car, but this video is not about the NC Turbo. So, Flyin Miata effectively started when Bill Cardell put a turbocharger on his 1990 Miata back in, I think it was 1989, had about 1,800 miles on it, and it didn't work properly. He got it working right. It was a very primitive system. He got it working, and the manufacturer basically said, well, we're going to start sending people to you. And that's more or less how Flyin Miata started, how the dealer alternative grew into becoming a Mazda Miata shop. And that means we've been involved in turbo Miatas for as long as there have been turbo Miatas. We've been selling turbo systems ever since. There's been different generations. We did a complete redesign in 2006, and we've been doing evolutionary development ever since. We're always looking at these kits, how we can improve them, how we can make them more affordable, easier to install, cleaner. So this is the current end result. So one of the big things about this kit that we always make a big noise about, because it's important to us, is the fact they are emissions legal. These are available in, or these are legal to install and to run in California, as well as all other 49 states, and the rest of the world as well. Basically, we have proof from testing that they do not adversely affect emissions. California ARB EO D601-4, I think it is. It's available online. You can read it if you'd like. It's pretty dry, but there you go. So that's an important thing to us, and that is the case with all of our turbo systems. They're all emissions legal. So one of the things that we do when we're designing these things, we also try to make sure that any modifications, any upgrades are backwards compatible, so that if we come out with an improved part, it still applies to our existing customers. They can buy that part, they can bolt it on, and make their system as good as it can be. You know, this whole intercooler system, for example, will bolt onto a turbo system from 2006. Possibly even earlier, actually. I think it'll fit some of the earlier ones as well. And that gives you the latest intercooler setup without having to rework your entire system to buy a whole new turbo kit, whatever. It means you can keep your car going as long as possible. We had a customer drop by today. Mark, he lives up in the mountains of Colorado, and he put a turbo in his car in sometime in the early 2000s. I might have installed it actually. But it put on the car nearly 20 years ago, and there are still, if he wants to upgrade certain parts, you know, go to the new intercooler or whatever, he can still do that. And that's what we're aiming for with our development designs. So for example, I'll show you some of the new and sexy parts. These are our newest manifolds. We had to go to a new casting supplier, a new casting foundry, and we took advantage of that to run these through a bunch of CFD to rework the molds. And we have come up with these beautiful new manifolds that are dimensionally the same as the old ones in terms of the mounting points. But they are lighter. They flow, I think, is 24% better in terms of actual airflow. The airflow is more coherent. And we have seen on the dyno, we've seen improved spool in particular on these things. So the turbo comes up to full boost quicker because basically you have a more efficient manifold. And so that is a clean sheet design from Flyin Miata, although we did make sure that we kept the important stuff. The turbo's in the same place. This is a 1.6 one right here. To make sure that it was backwards compatible. These are also Cerakoted, which is a type of very hard, very durable ceramic. And it's designed for high temperatures, the one we're using. So we've been using these on our own cars for over a year. No degradation of the ceramic. It's not just a pretty coating, it's actually functional as well. So we Cerakote both the manifolds and the outlets. And the combination of both of these, there's actually a weight savings of 4 to 6 pounds on the new designs compared to the old ones. And even these, you can see, if you want to get close, Travis, one of the nice things about these cast manifolds is or these cast outlets, is you can really make sure that the airflow is as good as possible. So we've got a bunch of tricks in here to make sure the airflow is managed well and still have things like room for wrench clearance, because that's important. You have to install these. So with all of these, you can see we've made efforts to make sure you can actually get wrenches in there. So this is important. You have to be able to install these. So there we go. What else do I have on here? Okay, so the basic kit, and for those who aren't familiar with the turbo system, how it works, this is the turbocharger. Exhaust gas comes out of the engine, spins a turbine in here, and that spins a compressor. There's basically a little shaft in there, it's like a little jet engine. Spins a compressor in this side. Air comes in here, gets compressed, heats up as part of that, gets put through the intercooler, which cools down the temperature, makes the air denser again, and pumps it into the intake manifold, where basically now your engine is all full of extra oxygen. You can throw more fuel at it, bigger bang, more power, more zoom. This is a bypass valve that when you close the throttle, you've got a whole bunch of pressurized air coming through here. You close the throttle, it bounces off and goes through the bypass valve, back up in here where it goes back into the turbocharger. That's the characteristic noise you get from a turbo, is that bypass valve opening up. Some people use blow-off valves, which dumps the air to atmosphere. You can't do that and remain emissions legal. It also causes problems with cruise drivability, idle behavior, because that becomes an inlet at certain points. So we use a bypass valve like this. I think the Volkswagen guys call it a diverter valve, which is basically the same thing. Different terminology and different subcultures. What can you do? So the basic kit with the turbo sizing that's on here and the parts are on here are the sort of thing that with different engine management, you can run 240, 250 wheel horsepower for decades. We have customers who have done that. It's engineered to that level. The turbo is sized for that. We run them using stock injectors, using our Voodoo box, because that gives us the emissions compliance. And that limits the power to, depending on the engine, the 1.6s make the least power because of the smallest engine. The late NBs make the most power because they're a bigger engine with a better head and bigger injection. They'll get almost up to 200 horsepower at the wheels, which is pretty healthy. That's nearly double what they come from the factory. The 1.6s, I think they're about 160 horsepower at the wheels. Considering they come from the factory with about 92, it's a good increase as well. That's another 70 horsepower, so all feels good. So let's go through some of the stuff that's on here. I'm going to start on this side. We've already talked about this manifold. Beautiful, beautiful manifold. It does have EGR fittings for the 1.8 cars. 1.6 cars don't have EGR fittings because in the US, 1.6 cars don't have EGR, so don't need it. The turbocharger itself is a legitimate, from Garrett turbocharger. It's a GT2560R, which we find is a very good match to the Miata engine in terms of response. It's a bomb-proof turbocharger. They just run and run and run. Fantastic turbo. We water cool them as well as run oil through them, of course, so that prevents any sort of coking problems. Make sure that you don't need to treat it unusually. You don't need to worry about all the problems about letting it idle for a while when you shut it down, because it's got that water cooling on there. They're attached to the manifold with custom Inconel studs that's designed to keep this joint as tight as possible, so it doesn't, even on track use, doesn't stretch, doesn't loosen off the fasteners. We also use stage 8 fasteners on here, which are these locking fasteners, which mean that the stud, the nut, cannot move when it's locked into place. And these can easily be removed if you want to remove the stud. So it's a very good temperature resistant, removable locking fastener. So that's part of it. Silicone, this case we have it attached to one of our reroutes. This is the only reroute in the market that's actually designed to be used for turbo cars in terms of how the water lines run through it. It is an option on the cars. You can run the reroute, or you can just choose not to, your choice. But all the lines are silicone lines. There are multiple levels, multiple layers in there. The turbine outlet is a full-on casting. As you saw earlier, we've got that nice smooth airflow going through there. And also it is rock solid bomb-proof. We used to have problems way back in the day, early 2000s, we'd have problems with fabricated downpipes cracking up here. So we just plain got rid of that, went to this cast part, no more problems. And then the rest of the downpipe, stainless steel. This is an NB turbo system, but so the shape of some of these things is a little different on the NAs. General concept, the same though. This has a lifetime warranty on it, nice polished stainless steel, made here in the US. If we go over this side, you can see all of the hoses are nice silicone formed pieces. The reason we do that is because, one, it allows us to come up with things like this inlet that has spaghetti coming off it without having to worry about a bunch of clamps, a bunch of ugly things stuck together. It means that this hose, for example, this is a high pressure hose running from the turbocharger to the intercooler. There's only one joint at each end. There's no place for it to blow apart, which is a common failure on turbo systems. If you pop those boost hoses apart, all of a sudden your boost goes away. And if you're running a car with a MAF or an airflow meter, car stops running as well because the air is not going through there anymore. So we make these one piece. These are custom made for us, and there's something like 7 different layers. I think there's Kevlar in there, and the inside of the hose is actually designed to be tacky to give you as much grip as possible to keep it from slipping off, even if your hose clamps are loose. It's always best practice to put a little bit of hairspray in there to give it a little bit of extra hold, but yeah, these things basically don't, as long as everything else is in place, they don't blow off. We use quality clamps. These are American-made Breeze clamps that give a nice solid hold on the silicone, and they're not going to cut. They're not like a worm gear that will cut into your silicone. These things are solid. Locking nuts on them, they're not going anywhere. Intercooler, of course. And the intercoolers are designed to work with air conditioning on all Miatas. There's no problem with running AC on these things. They're also compatible with power steering, so you don't have to give anything up for your extra horsepower. You've got power steering, you've got AC, it's all good. So another big silicone hose, and these are the shape they are because there's parts of the car in the way. This hops up and runs in here to our turbine outlet. Again, lots of good quality Breeze clamps. And then we use a proper bypass valve on there. That's from TurboSmart, I believe. And then the hose to run that back over. So that is the fundamental system right there. We also include, and this is a sort of attention to detail that we've had to do to get these work properly. This is a custom silicone hose, lower radiator hose, because there's not as much room down here as we really would like. That's roughly around there. So the best way to deal with that was to use a proper silicone hose. And this is a one piece, unlike the two piece that's found on some Miatas. So again, fewer points of failure. If you're replacing the stock radiator hose on your NA, for example, there's a piece of steel pipe in the middle that rusts out, and this gets rid of that. So this is the sort of thing that comes included with the kit to make it fit as well as possible. It is a complete kit. All the nuts and bolts and fasteners and zip ties, everything you need to install it is included. You're not going to have to go hunting to the hardware store. This is everything you need to actually turbocharge the car. On top of actually turbocharging the car, we have not, it does not include a clutch. It doesn't include any cooling upgrades. We offer a bunch of those, of course, and we would be happy to talk to you about what you need to make it work with your car. A stock clutch will probably not hold up to one of our turbo systems, so you are going to need a clutch at least. If your turbo system doesn't make you require a clutch, you need a better turbo system. I mean, that's kind of the whole point, really. But but cooling system upgrades, that sort of thing, we have a whole range of those available. We've talked about cooling systems in the past. Lots of videos on those on our channel. Definitely check those out. So the secret to making this work and to make it so there's no tuning required, to make sure that it is emissions legal, is the Voodoo Box. I've done a whole video on these. If you check it out on our channel, there's a whole video on how the Voodoo Box works, what it does. But effectively, it intercepts your injector signal and makes the injectors work harder when you're under boost. It delivers the more fuel you need, bigger bang, more power. We talked about that. But the nice thing is it's nice and simple to install. It's just a few wires, and there is no tuning. You plug this in, you hook it up to the boost signal, and you are done. No messing around with cold start, with idle, all the stuff that's hard to do with a full ECU. All the little corners in the map that people tend to overlook. They are still as good as they ever were. The factory took care of that for you. They've spent thousands of person hours getting that right, and so we don't mess with it. We just use this. Okay, and one other thing that I really think we need to mention is these come with lifetime support for the original owner. Our friend Mark, who came in here earlier that I mentioned, he put that turbo kit on his car in the early 2000s. Still full support for him, of course. If he has questions, if he needs something, we have our technicians there to give him a hand on it, to help him out. We have one customer who's had a turbo on his car since 1991 sometime. It's got at least 400,000 miles on it last time I saw it. And obviously more than that now. I said, at least, is he over 500,000, Mike? Yes. He's over 500,000 miles now. That's a lot of turbo time. His clutch pedal broke in half at 300,000 miles. But the turbo was fine. And of course, we still support that as well. I mean, you're not just buying from a fly-by-night operator here. This is Flyin Miata is here to help you out with your turbo system. Now, one of the questions we get is, can you turbo your 1.6? And of course you can. We offer this kit, all of these parts, the slim available quality for the 1.6, as well as both versions of the 1.8, the NA and the NB. Some of us here have turbo 1.6 cars. They're a really nice setup. It's basically just a slightly smaller version of the 1.8, especially the early 1.8. It makes about 10% less power because it's about 10% smaller. Makes sense. But there's no reason that you need to do a 1.8 swap in order to turbocharge your car. All of the parts that we have available for turbocharging, or almost all of them, are available for the 1.6 as well. I can tell you the 1.6 packaging is a little tight right about here. The air conditioning compressor on that particular car is awfully close to here, but we have routed stuff as best we can to make it work, and I've been running a 1.6 turbo car for years. Works great. Do we have any questions worth addressing at this point, Mike?
Yes. Speaking of high mileage cars, say you have a car with 250,000 miles on it, is it worth installing the turbo kit on it?
So the question, Mike, someone has it, Mike has passed along, is if you have a high mileage car, is it worth installing a turbo on it? And the answer to that one is if your engine's in good shape, you certainly can go ahead and install a turbo. Do a compression test, do a leak down test. If your rings are good, if your oil pressure is good, your bearings are good, basically if your engine is healthy, then go ahead and put the turbocharger on it. It won't necessarily make it last any longer, but a good turbo system like this one shouldn't really accelerate the wear process. You're going to spend more time at full throttle. I mean, that's kind of what you're doing, isn't it? You're going to be spending more time making more power, but the fundamental strength of the engine doesn't really go down with age. The wear parts are things like rings, things like bearings. As long as you have the oil pressure, as long as you have good compression, then really there's not a whole lot to be worried about. 250,000 miles, I mean, probably for other reasons you might be looking at things like refreshing the valves, looking at new rings. It's not the turbo system that's making that determination for you. One of the things that you do have to do when you're installing this turbocharger, and we do have an entire installation series on our turbochargers. If you want to see these being installed, we have, I think, an 8-part series on how to install one of these in a car. And I think we also talk about the installation on Project Ron, that build series we did recently. We saw the installation on that one a little bit. The biggest question, the biggest concern people have is you have to drill a hole in your oil pan. And that's for the oil to return from the turbo and drain back down into the pan. So the pan's down here, usually. It's made of thick cast aluminum. You need to drill that hole. You need to tap it and put a fitting inside. It's actually psychologically more difficult than it is actually difficult. It's not that hard to do. We have a bunch of best practices that will help you get the greatest chance of success. And of course, we've been drilling Miata oil pans for decades, and the failure numbers are extremely low. The biggest mistake you can make is basically just go to town on it, burst your way through the oil pan, and keep going, because then you start drilling into the oil pickup tube. That's a no-no. But as long as you stop, as soon as you get through the pan, it's all good. And we do have a video series that tells you how to do that, and our instructions are 40-something pages. They try to tell you everything you need to know, and they will cover how to drill the pan. It's not so bad. Once you get your nerve up, you can do it. So, one of the questions, will I be able to install this turbo kit myself, or will I need a professional? The first turbo kit I installed, first Flyin Miata turbo kit I installed, I did in my garage at home before I joined Flyin Miata. I had a couple of friends around. It was his car. I guess I had to let him come. And we did it in a garage with a dirt floor. None of us were professionals. We were just following the instructions. And we drove the car into the garage on Friday. We were test driving it on Sunday. So as long as you're a mechanic that doesn't draw blood every time they pick up a screwdriver, and you're willing to read instructions and pay attention to the instructions, it is completely possible to install this as an amateur. We have designed it to be as easy to install as possible. You know, these one-piece hoses, well, two-piece here, but one-piece hoses make life a lot easier. The bracketry for the intercooler nothing requires welding here. It's all designed to be as easy as possible to install. So we've done everything we can to make it possible for the DIY person to put these in. And the majority of them are installed by their owners. So no, you do not need to be a professional. One of the questions here is also, how do I know which version of the kit you need? If you have questions about that, contact us. We've got an entire department. Something like 1/4 of the company is devoted to answering your questions directly. So if you have a question such as, I have a 1990 they put the engine from a 1997 into, and then we put the head off a NB2, a 2002 on it, but we deactivated the VTCF, what should I be using, what turbo kit? They'll be able to help you out. They are experts in Flyin Miata turbos. Generally speaking, it's pretty easy. You have a 1990 through 93, you have a 94 through 97, or you have a 99 to 05. Voila. One thing I will mention about the 99 to 2000 cars, there is a 2-cat variant on that car. If you're from California, you might be aware of this. It's a great big football right here. That is a variant. We do not have a turbo system for that particular car. In order for it to be fully carb legal, we would have to keep that catalytic converter there, but that unfortunately means a new manifold. You'd have to move the turbocharger. All of a sudden, these pipes don't fit anymore. We'd have to rework the entire hot side, and that has not come to be a high enough priority yet to justify the expense of the tooling and the parts. However, this will all fit all 1999 2000 cars. Not carb legal because you are removing a cat. Federally, actually not really legal either, but this will all fit. So that hardware is all the same on the same side. One question is in here, is it difficult to switch our kit over to a standalone with different injectors and tune for more power? And the answer to that is, you are installing different injectors and an aftermarket ECU. There's the difficulty. Aftermarket ECUs, it can be a challenge to get the same level of quality of tune as you get with an OE ECU. As I mentioned earlier, thousands of hours spent on tuning factory ECUs. Aftermarket ECUs tend to not have quite the same level of attention paid to them. You might have thousands of users, but they don't necessarily have the depth of experience and the tools that the factory does. So it's quite easy to install an aftermarket ECU and injectors. And the fact there's a turbo kit on the car doesn't change that. The tuning process is the challenge, and that's going to be up to the person who is doing the tuning for you. And that's a place where having a professional makes a big difference. Trying to muddle your way through that one yourself can be frustrating. People have done it, but be aware that that will be the most challenging part. And our turbo system will not be a factor in that. That will simply be the difficulty of aftermarket ECU and injectors. But if you do that, the turbocharger itself is good for mid to high 200s at the wheels. The 2560 is a good match to the engine in that range, in the 180 to 250 horsepower range. It's a good size for that, good response. If you want to go more than that, you're going to have to use a larger turbocharger. This is a T2 flange. Basically anything that uses the same footprint can be dropped in there. There's a 3071 that's pretty close. There's a 2860. The classic disco potato can be found in this form factor. Those can fit in there. It's going to be up to you to match one well to the engine. Now, we used to sell a smaller turbocharger called the 2554 that was aimed at the 1.6 crowd particularly. That has been discontinued. You can still buy yourself a 2554 somewhere and drop it in there. The form factor is the same. The problem is that one, it didn't sell very well because really it felt a little more responsive, but if you looked at the actual boost curves, it's limited in terms of actual power, and it didn't necessarily get there any faster. It just felt a little laggy or a little less responsive because it had further to go if it was trying to reach its full potential. So we discontinued that particular one, although you can still drop a 2554 in there if you want to. Do we have any more questions over there, Mike?
Yes. Is it true that 1.6 Miatas or 1.6 engines are truly the better engine to boost?
Is it true that the 1.6 engine is a better engine to boost? Was that posted by Ethan?
Not this time.
Not this time, was not Ethan. Okay. Is the 1.6 really a better engine to boost? And the answer is not really. It's the same engine. The difference between a 90 through 93 1.6 and a 94 through 97 1.8 is minuscule. It's basically just the same engine that's a little bit bigger. It's a little bit longer. It's got a little more stroke. You use the same rods. The pistons are different because the bore is slightly different, but it's just the whole thing just zoomed in a little. So in terms of strength, the 1.6 is just as strong, but no stronger than the later cars. So really, in terms of durability, that 1990 car, obviously I was talking about, that has 500,000 miles on it, that's a 1.6. There were no 1.8s at the time. Nice and strong, but we also have many customers, such as, again, I'm going to talk about Mark, who stopped by. His car has got, I don't know how many miles it's had on it since it was boosted. That's a 95. It's doing just fine. So yeah, there's really no, in terms of ability to stand boost, there's not a lot of difference. The later NB cars, like this engine here, they've got better intake manifolds. The port designs changed a little bit. They come a little more efficient. You can make the same power level with a little less boost, but they're still well within the capabilities of the engine. So one question that we got beforehand is, what makes them carb legal? Are they truly 50-state legal? And the answer is yes, they are truly 50-state legal. Again, carb EO number D601-4 or D601-5. Okay, it was -3 when that sticker was printed. This is just an increment. Every time we do an update, they give us a new number there. But basically, yes, it comes with that sticker. If you show up at a California mission station with this, you pop the hood, and they see that sticker, they say, well, thank you very much. They might do an OBD2 check like they do with any vehicle, but it should have no problem. This kit will not cause check engine lights. So it should have no problem passing at all. And that, by getting the California legality, that allows us to prove at the federal level that these kits do not affect emissions, and so therefore they are emissions legal throughout the U.S. So what we have right here, of course, that's an NB1. This is a 2002, I think, might be 3, and this is a 95, if I remember correctly. Can't tell from the color anymore, but these kits. This was used one of our development cars as a test mule. This is one of our show cars that we take around to shows. Travis, the camera operator, has personally driven this car 1,000 miles in a day. We went down to Monterey for Car Week and drove it home, stopped at the salt flats, had all sorts of fun, and it just tooted along 30+ miles a gallon on the highway. Acted like a completely normal Miata, but when he wanted to get into boost because he was chasing a V8 car, then it was right there for him. Any more questions over there, Mike?
Yes. So
Mike's reading questions. He gives them a lot of questions.
One of them is, I love you, Keith Tanner.
Thanks, Mom.
I want more boost. Can I have more?
So a question is more of a statement. I want more boost. Can I have more? The limitation on our kits is the ability of the stock injectors to deliver fuel. So, I mean, that's a big part of why we're able to keep the emissions legal, is because we're using all of that factory ECU, the factory injectors. If you want more boost, you need to provide more fuel, and that means aftermarket injectors, and that usually means aftermarket ECU. And so yes, it's 100% possible. There's a couple of downsides. One, probably not emissions legal where you live. At the federal level, as a vendor, we have to be more aware of this than a lot of individuals do. So you live in rural North Carolina, and the only emissions check you have is your engine still in your car, hasn't fallen on the road? We still have to maintain a higher standard. So you can put on larger injectors, you can put on different ECUs if you want to. You're on your own on that one. We don't support it, and we will recommend to you that be aware of what you're getting yourself into because of the difficulties of dealing with an aftermarket ECU. They are a challenge to get that last 20% of drivability of proper behavior. That's what takes 90% of the time. So just be aware of what you're getting yourself into there, and also make sure that you have full legality where you're working. If you put an aftermarket ECU in a 96 and later car, for example, you will no longer have an OBD2 signal. Basically, you won't be able to return OBD2 codes. That's an automatic emissions fail in pretty much every state. So be aware of that. The kit itself, I mean, this basic kit is functionally the same one that was on our turbo car Pokey, which is about a 400 horsepower stroker engine. Same manifold, different, much bigger turbocharger, same outlet casting, same intercooler, same piping. All the stuff on the front of the engine was the same. So it's built for a lot more power than you're actually going to be making, but that's okay. Headroom is a good thing. Anything else there, Mike?
Yeah, speaking of horsepower, I've got a question.
Speaking of horsepower, we're talking about turbochargers, so we are speaking about horsepower.
What's the intercooler rated for?
What is the intercooler rated for in terms of horsepower? It's actually kind of a tricky question because it's not like it stops working at 301 horsepower. Intercoolers exchange heat. That's what they do. The more heat that comes into them, the more heat they have to shed to bring it back down to ambient. So if you have a hot air intake, if we put that thing behind the radiator, for example, we'd be working our intercooler harder. If we run more boost, if we run a small turbo really, really hard, we'll have very high compressor outlet temperatures. We'll be working our intercooler harder. What's the line there? There's no hard line on this. Like I just mentioned, we've done a 400 horsepower car using this intercooler. What happens basically, it just starts to struggle. It starts, the intercooler will eventually start to heat soak. It won't be able to shed heat fast enough. If you're on a road course and you're or if you're driving a turbocharged spec Miata, if you're running nose to tail with people, you got a lot less airflow through the intercooler. It will start struggling faster than it will if you're doing drag strip runs and it has time to cool down before and all the airflow in the world. So you can't really put a power rating on an intercooler. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't just stop working at one point, but it's got lots of headroom. Mike.
Good one. So you talked about turbo kit. I want to do the turbo kit. What things does the turbo kit not include that I should plan on doing to my Miata?
Okay, so this is general turbo knowledge here. The question is, I want the turbocharged Miata. What else should I do? And this is getting a little bit out of. I wanted to give you guys an idea, or you folks an idea of what constitutes a Flyin Miata turbo kit. Why you might want to choose a Flyin Miata one instead of one that's just a pile of pipes and some hose clamps. So other things you want to take into account when you turbocharge your Miata engine, regardless of what kit you use. You want to make sure it's mechanically healthy. Turbo kits will not fix oil leaks. They will not fix bad compression. They will not. If you're blowing smoke, you're going to blow more smoke. So make sure your engine is healthy to start with. Make sure your cooling system is healthy, and you will likely have to upgrade your cooling system. You're making more power, which means you're making more heat, and you've got an intercooler in front of your radiator, so you are going to be stressing your cooling system more. So there's a good chance you will have to improve your cooling system. The Reroute that we have designed is designed specifically to work with, well, not specifically, it's designed to work with turbocharged cars. It's got design aspects that are purely for turbocharged cars. Doesn't make them not work on naturally aspirated, but it's the only one on the market that has actually taken turbo cooling into account. There's also some very clever stuff going on inside here, but this will give your cooling system as much help as possible, as well as radiators, stuff like that. You will almost definitely have to do a clutch because, again, the holding power of a clutch is a torque number. You're increasing the torque, you're probably going to slip that clutch. Even if it's brand new stock, you probably have to put in an upgraded clutch. Those are the two big ones. You will likely want to address the rest of the exhaust system because back pressure is the enemy of turbo systems. I will warn you that if you go too far in that case, you might have trouble keeping the boost down low enough for the voodoo box to give you enough fuel. So we don't recommend opening on one of our emissions legal kits. You don't want a 3-inch exhaust on this thing. 2.5 will do just fine. New catalytic converter or whatever, even a 2 1/4 will actually flow enough for what we're looking to do. So you'll probably want an exhaust system. Your car will be quieter, at least exhaust note will be quieter with a turbo because you have what we call a rotary muffler in the middle of it. That will quieten the car down overall, so you may actually want a louder exhaust just because, I mean, we all put playing cards in our bike spokes as a kid, didn't we? We like the noise. It's we'll admit it. You don't have to make noise to make power, but it's part of the fun. So you may want to address the exhaust system, but that's fundamentally what we're looking at. Mike, you have your hand up. Speaking of noise, Mike.
Does this kit make this noise?
I hope the mics pick that up. Yeah, does it make turbo noises? It does make turbo noises. You can hear whooshing, you can hear the psh from the blow-off valve going off. It doesn't quite sound like a diesel truck with a clipped turbo. You don't quite get that weird turbine sound that they do, but that's fine. But yes, it does make turbo noises. If you don't like turbo noises, we do offer what we call a hush kit. And on the NA like this one, what that is it's a insulating foam basically that goes around the air box. See this air box? Make sure you're getting cold air no matter what. So this is part of the design of the kit. I didn't show you this is the heat shield that covers the turbocharger, because turbochargers start looking a little crusty after a while. It's just the nature of the beast. So all the kits come with this heat shield to make them look great. But we do offer this sound deadening kit. On the NB, I think it's actually a cover that goes right over the top of it to keep the noise down as much as possible. So if you're not a fan of the big turbo noise, we do have ways to keep that down, keep it a little more subtle. To each their own. That's why it's an option. Any more questions, Mike?
Is it possible to delete or disable the VVT in order to run the extra boost?
The question is it possible to delete or disable the VVT in order to run extra boost? Yeah, it might be confusing with cylinder compression. There's no need to mess with the VVT system at all. In fact, it's quite nice. It helps spool things up. It's a good addition to a turbo car. Leave your VVT in place. Don't mess with it. The VVT engines tend to be higher compression. The higher compression means basically you can make more power with less boost. And so you don't need to run quite as much boost on those ones. If you want to run more boost, you're going to run out of fuel. And we go back into the whole fuel ECU injector conversation again. So there's nothing about a VVT engine that makes it more or less suitable for boost. But it is a nice, it's a nice thing to have. I like the VVT. Yes, Mike?
What about our still beloved automatic Miatas?
What about automatic Miatas? So these will work with automatic Miatas. The downside or the difficulty comes with the downpipe clearing the transmission. And this is something I realized just the other day that I'm a little rusty on. I think on the NAs, you might just have to reshape the downpipe slightly. This is an NB downpipe, but I mean, the same concept. This heat shield, by the way, is not standard. That's an optional upgrade that we offer, this DEI titanium heat shield. Normally, this is just a straight pipe, but this is a show unit. Everything's bolted on. You know how it works. You may have to reshape this a little bit. On the NBs, you might have to put in a manual exhaust system. I forget, there's something different about the flange locations, and I just realized the other day I was rusty on this one. I wasn't expecting that question, so I didn't bone up on it, but there's nothing about the automatic transmission specifically that will prevent you from turbocharging the car. The bell housing wider, yeah, they're physically bigger transmissions. There actually is a 1.6 Miata that was built as a drag car with a built-up transmission, built-up automatic trans, and he's using one of these turbo kits on it. It's stroker engine, all sorts of nuts. Yeah, Jeremy.
94 and newer automatics, the automatic transmission controller is built into the PCM.
All right, so what Jeremy's just reminding us of is that starting in 1994, the transmissions were controlled by the factory ECU. Earlier cars, they were sort of standalone, they were almost mechanical, but the 94 and later, so you can't really put an ECU on, a standalone ECU on those. You can't mega squirt an automatic 94 Miata because now you have to do transmission control, and that's just not going to happen. So this kit actually works better with an automatic than something that relies on an aftermarket ECU in that particular case. So thanks for reminding me on that one. One question we also got is how long will a 1990 through 96 smaller 1.6 rear end last behind a turbocharger? And that's a driver question because we've seen people break those things with stock engines and we've seen them last tens and tens of thousands of miles behind turbo engines. I don't know if our 500,000 mile car, if that one got a Torsen eventually or not. It probably did at some point. I know that one of our shop cars, we ran it for at least 80,000 miles, including lots of track use on a stock 1.6 rear end. So it's going to depend on the shock loads you put through it. Doing clutch drops, clutch kicks, basically if you're just shocking that transmission, that rear end, you're more likely to break it apart. The limited slip in a 1.8 rear end is better anyway, so it's a good modification to make regardless of strength, but it is also considerably stronger. So I wouldn't necessarily I wouldn't avoid turbocharging a 1.6 car because of that rear end, but I would keep in mind that at some point, if I'm driving it with a lack of mechanical empathy, shall we say, there's a higher chance that I'm going to bust that thing apart. And that happens even if it's naturally aspirated. Question, Mike.
What makes our turbo kit better than X brand other turbo kit that might be cheaper and has other things?
What makes our turbo kit better than X brand? That's what I've been talking about for the last 25 minutes, Mike. Well, 45 minutes. Good Lord. Summary. What makes it better than Joe eBay turbo kit? Well, for one, Flyin Miata does. We'll answer your phone calls. You have a question? You can ask us. You want to know how to install it? Check our videos. You want to see the full installation instructions? Download them. Check them out. That's a big part of it. If you've never turbocharged a car before, you need someone to help hold your hand, and we're here to do that for you. But the big differences are, we're using CFD designed manifolds that are not just a fuzzy photocopied mock-up of something someone else built in 2000. I've seen those on eBay. They're our old kits. They're obsolete. Someone knocked off one of our old manifolds that has been obsolete for more than 2 decades, and they're selling them on eBay. So you're going to get the latest designs, Cerakoting on these things, ceramic coating on these parts. You get this bulletproof exhaust or turbine outlet. You get the one-piece silicone hoses instead of having to weld together something out of pipes and just a bunch of off-the-shelf hardware store parts. You get high-quality clamps. You get an actual for-real Garrett turbocharger. You get the engineering behind it all in terms of proving parts. You get these locking fasteners, the Stage A fasteners. You get these unique, custom-made Inconel studs. You get you get proper cold air intake over there. Just basically quality engineering, quality parts backed up by quality company. That's basically what you're doing. You can spend less money initially. You probably won't spend less money by the time you're done. And of course, you can register in any state in the US. It's CARB legal. And you can, even if you manage to get it through a hot smog in California, you're gonna have a hard time selling a car to someone else. So it's a good thing, even if you know a guy. Any more questions over there, Mike? They are rolling in. This is a topic full of enthusiasm. And I will repeat, for those who weren't watching when we started, we don't have these in stock right now. We know we don't have them in stock right now. We are working hard to get them in stock. If you want one, they are coming in. They're going out the door as fast as they come in. If you want one, sign up for notifications on our website and be ready to buy when you get that email. Because the last time we got a batch, they were selling one every 3 minutes. So you need to be able to move fast if you want one of these things. We're working hard to fix that, to make sure that they will be on the shelf at some point. But for the next few months, it's going to be like this. They're going to be selling faster than we can build them. So we're building them as fast as we can, and we appreciate your patience. But they are for real. We are shipping them, really, honest. Mike, your speed reading over there.
Yes. I want it so much. Can I drive my car to you and have you install it?
Good question. Can we install it for you? And the answer is unfortunately not anymore. We started off as a mechanic shop doing installations. But we realized that our shop time was better spent developing new products such as the NC turbocharger instead of installing customer cars. So these days we are not installing these kits for our customers. Our shop is devoted to R&D only. So I apologize for people. I know there's a bunch of people like my friend Mark who would prefer that they come to us for the work. At the moment, that is not our focus. We are trying to cover as many people as possible by allocating all of our resources to R&D and to customer support. The best thing to do if you want someone to install one of these is, first off, if you're in a local club, there's probably that guy who loves wrenching and has a garage full of an awesome set of tools, and get together, do a weekend install. That's the first time I did a turbo install, was just like that. Also, ask your local club. They probably have recommendations for local shops that know Miatas that have good suggestions for you. Mike, you have your hand up.
Help.flynmiata.com has a list of all of our dealers.
Help.flynmiata.com. If you go there, that has a list of all of our dealers. It's not an exhaustive list of everybody who knows how to install a turbo kit, but it might give you some leads in your area. You may have to travel a couple hours, but I mean, we can't evaluate every single mechanic there is out there. There's always new ones coming online. There's guys going out of business, but that's a good place to start, and definitely talk to your local club. Mike, more questions? You guys are wearing Mike out. He's trying to read these. He's trying to read all these questions. 1.6 questions, all right.
What about my diff?
What about, I actually, so if you have a question about the 1.6 diff, please rewind about 10 minutes. I was just talking about that one, so I'm just going to punt on that one right now. We actually already talked about it.
How do these turbos affect throttle response? Is it different than stock?
Good question. How do they affect throttle response? The answer is because we're using the stock ECU. The stock ECU is one of the major contributors to how the car responds to the throttle. That has not changed. The actual initial jump in, I'm playing with the throttle here because psychologically it's what you do. The jump in power as soon as you crack that open is going to be just as quick. The difference is you've actually got a little bit of pressure in here already. So you've actually got a little more pressure than you do factory. So you've actually got very good throttle response. What the question might be is more about lag in terms of how long does it take from the time you go full throttle to the time you have maximum boost or maximum power. And that's very quick. I mean, we do our best to keep that as quick as possible by good turbo sizing, by an efficient intercooler that isn't terribly restrictive, and keeping these runs as short as we can. There's always going to be a small bit of turbo lag. Some of it depends on what you have for an exhaust system. Some of it depends on your altitude. And sometimes it depends on what Jeremy is going to tell me when he's got his hand up over here.
So if I could just point out a little bit from the perspective of the dynamometer.
I'm going to stand over here so you can talk loud into my microphones.
So it's something to point out from the perspective of the dynamometer is that with a ball bearing turbo system, I'm Jeremy, by the way, these are flowing air at idle. So when you look, if you take a car and you put it on the dyno and you run it out, and then you put the turbo on the car, run it out, so you have a good A-B comparison on the same car, what you will see is that from idle all the way out, the turbo system is making more power than the naturally aspirated system, because these are flowing positive pressure even off idle just a little bit. So it's got that extra manifold pressure flowing through there. What people sometimes think about really is that throttle response. And it is true that the turbo has a little bit of lag in the response, but it's not because it's making less power. It's actually making more power. It's just a psychological trick, because the difference between a naturally aspirated car, you're going from here to here, whereas in a turbo car, you're going from here to here. And so there's the psychological lag time of between the time that you tip in to the time you reach your maximum boost level. It's a longer time because you're going a lot farther. So it is actually making more power at all RPM all the time with the turbo system.
Yeah, you've got further to go. Yeah.
And back in the old days when we would compare a turbo car to even a high compression naturally aspirated car, that was still the case. Sorry.
Jeremy's a big believer in turbochargers. One of the side effect actually of that fact that the turbo is always pushing a little bit of air is that you effectively have no restriction in your intake, and your fuel economy on the highway generally tends to go up slightly, maybe only 1 mile a gallon or so, but you will see a slight improvement in fuel economy. Although the first few tanks are going to be dismal because you're going to be spending all of your time at full throttle enjoying your boost noises. Once you get that out of your system, you're going to find that actual, cruise fuel economy is actually very slightly improved because of the fact the turbocharger is always moving a little bit of air, and there's just no restriction in your intake anymore. Mike, more questions? Is this kit good for track use? And the answer is yes, it is. Hundreds of Miatas have done probably millions of hours of track time with these kits on there. The same thing that makes them reliable for long-term use is the sort of thing that makes them reliable for track use. The lack of joints in the intercooler system, for example, that's the sort of stuff that blows apart on track and ruins your day. Those Inconel studs and those locking hardware here prevents these bolts from loosening off. Yeah, it's a very solid kit from the hardware side of things for track use. The engine management, and it depends on the year of your car, the older the car, the more primitive, shall we say, the engine management is. The 1.6 cars don't have knock sensors, for example. Actually, none of the NAs have knock sensors. So if you get yourself in trouble where you've got bad gas, you've overheated to the point where you're starting to detonate, the car won't do anything to prevent you from having a problem there. So we do recommend, if you're going to be running this on the track, running it hard, pay close attention to your gauges. The biggest problem you're going to have is cooling. That's usually the biggest challenge for turbo cars on track because you're working them so hard and you've got this extra heat exchanger in front of the radiator. But as I mentioned earlier, we have lots of solutions to improve cooling on the track. That's something I would recommend you investigate. You look at things like our Reroute, our cross-flow radiator that we developed. That's the sort of thing that will help you with track durability. The actual hardware, rock solid. It has been developed over the years. It has been through lots and lots of testing, lots and lots of customer feedback. This is a very, very robust system for track use. Mike, do we have more?
Can you talk about compatibility with our Reroute?
I will talk about compatibility with our Reroute, yes. And I will mention this car behind us right here. This is one of our test mules. When we want to test a $4,000 suspension, we bolt it on this car, we take it to the track, put it on some sticky tires, and then we run it on the track, and it's running one of our standard Stage 1 turbo kits at stock boost. It has cooling upgrades, partly because it's being used to test cooling upgrades. But, this is a car that basically, this has to be an anvil. We're not interested when we're out there testing suspension. We're not interested in testing the engine, so the engine just has to work. And so that's why this is set up the way it is. It just runs. What was that question again, Mike? Reroute. Does it work with our Reroute? And the answer is 100% it works with our Reroute. There's one on this car right here, actually. When we developed this Reroute, one of the things that we did, and Brandon has actually done some fairly deep dives on this, but we actually worked with some of the engineers at the local university to measure temperatures throughout the system, and we discovered that the turbocharger actually contributes a significant amount of heat to the cooling system. More than just a little, I forget the exact numbers, if it's 25% or 50%, but it's an enormous amount of heat to the cooling system. And most turbo installations take that hot water and dump it right back into the mixing manifold, which means it doesn't go through the radiator. It goes right back into the engine. That's one of the reasons why turbo cars have challenges with cooling. And so when we designed our reroute, and this is something that's unique to our reroute, we made sure that all of the water coming out of the turbocharger goes back through the radiator and gets cooled before it's put back into the engine, which helps keep your engine temperatures under control considerably. So when you are buying one of our turbos, actually one of the options is, do you want the reroute connection kit? And that's basically what we have here. It's the water lines that will connect you directly to the reroute. And you can see the water lines have heat shielding on them to protect them from turbochargers, all that good stuff. But this reroute is specifically designed to be used with turbocharged engines. And of course, it was developed with our turbocharged engines because actually, not much to see when it's actually on the car, is it? It's kind of hidden back there. It's the reason Mazda didn't put the thermostat back there in the first place. But the reroute, and this is an older version. We actually have some new hoses that make it a little bit easier, but I'm not going to get into the reroute today. Basically, the short answer is yes, definitely it will work with our reroute system, and it's a great cooling upgrade specifically for turbos. Mike.
What oil do we recommend, and what kind of maintenance should you expect after adding a turbo?
Okay, these are great questions. What oil do we recommend, and what maintenance should you expect with a turbocharger? So for oil, generally speaking, 10W30 for street use, 10W40 for track use. That's more or less what we've always recommended. Use a good quality synthetic. We recommend that for all Miata engines, but especially for turbo engines where you're going to be running them a little harder. In terms of maintenance concerns, there's nothing really extra involved in maintaining a turbocharger. You're definitely going to want to check for leaks, especially if you're running on track. I mean, you should be doing a nut and bolt in your car on a regular basis anyway. But it's the sort of thing where if you have damaged, if you've nicked a hose or if you've cooked something, you want to find out about that sooner rather than later. But generally speaking, there's not much to maintain here. The turbocharger uses oil from the engine, so it's not like a supercharger with a separate oil supply that needs to be changed. When you change the oil in the engine, you change the oil in the turbocharger. You do have an open element air filter that will need to be cleaned occasionally. That's fairly easy to do. You can get cleaning kits at your local auto parts store. This is a K&N style filter that's actually custom made for this turbo kit. You can see the special angle. We had to get a special 5-degree angle on it to make sure it fit underneath the hood properly, and so that is a specific Flyin Miata turbo filter, but it is reusable and cleanable. So that's about the only special piece of maintenance that you need to do with the turbo. You are going to be working your engine harder, assuming you're exploiting that extra power. So you might want to drop your oil change interval down a little bit. Keep an eye on your oil anyway. You are working the engine harder, and as you work it harder, everything takes more abuse. So you might just want to bump up all of your maintenance schedule simply because you're driving a more powerful vehicle. The turbocharger itself, no real change. Mike.
The suggestion was made that maybe you take a drink of water.
Yes, the throat's starting to go a little, isn't it? I don't have any water handy, but yes, I appreciate it. Thank you. The suggestion was for me to take a drink of water. Thank you for your concern. I do appreciate that. Honestly, it was Ethan. Thank you, Ethan. Yes. Now, Ethan should come running out from the front and bring me a drink of water if he really cared, but he's working from home today. So, do we have anything a little more on topic, possibly? Yes. These poor people have been watching for nearly an hour, Mike.
I know. Well,
Their time is valuable.
Would you expect this to cause any more engine wear that you should be aware of going down the road?
So will this accelerate engine wear?
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to that customer of ours who has 500,000 miles on his Miata. He did replace the engine at about 60,000 miles because it had a short nose crank failure that had nothing to do with the turbocharger. That's a characteristic of the early 1.6 Miatas. Unfortunately, he got caught by that. So we put a new engine in. It's about 60,000 if I remember correctly. And then at about 400,000, he had to do a valve job. So that's what, 340,000 miles on an untouched bottom end, untouched top end. So based on that, I would say no, it doesn't necessarily increase wear. The things that increase wear, generally, when you're dealing with the wide world of Miata turbos, and if you're taking into account the ones that are maybe not perfectly engineered, what you're more likely to see is detonation taking engines apart. If you ping because you don't have enough, basically you don't have the knock control you need for the boost level you're running, you're not running the octane you need, you let things get too hot, it's more likely to be catastrophic failure, usually due to exceeding the capabilities of the system. You know, you've just gone past what it can do. In terms of day-to-day driving, in terms of occasional track use, I don't think it will affect the longevity of the engine at all. Sometimes Turbo Miatas get a bad rep for being unreliable, and often that's due to either poorly designed systems or systems that are being pushed beyond their design intent. So if you take this thing and you run it as designed, as intended, it should last for decades. I can't guarantee 500,000 miles, but it's been done. Mike, did we run out of? We have answered all of the questions that the internet has about Flyin Miata turbo systems. Oh, there comes another. There's always one right at the end, every single time. Mike is reading furiously.
Oh, people want to know if we'll do a Randall style intake for the turbo kits.
People want to know if we'll do a Randall style turbo intake. That would be an interesting idea. That'd be that's a different question. Okay, because that would be noisy. Yeah, you'd hear that for sure. It's not really in the plans at the moment. We'll leave that one as an exercise to the reader, trying to pull that off. So, all right. So I'm going to call it because here we go, 1 hour on the dot. Thanks for your attention. If you've got any more questions about these systems, please do not hesitate to contact one of our tech support folks. We have a whole bunch of experts backed up by even more experts who are willing and happy to answer your questions about our systems, either before you purchase or after you purchase. Of course, have a look on our website. We have our knowledge base in there, help.flymiata.com, has a bunch of information about our kits. If you look on our channel, you'll see that there's an installation guide, a video guide on how to install these things. That'll give you a good look at all of these parts in situ. We have our printed instructions or our written instructions that you're welcome to look at and print out and leave in the bathroom for when you have spare time. And check out our videos. We've done all sorts of videos on these sort of things. So again, if you like this kind of content, please make sure to like our channel, to subscribe to our videos. Make sure you sign up for notifications. That way you'll know when we're going live. We do go live every week on Thursdays. And we also drop other videos on all sorts of other things during the week. So make sure you comment on everything. We'll do our best to answer them. We appreciate your business. We appreciate your attention. So we're always happy to answer questions. So that's it. If you don't want to know anything more about FM turbos, if we didn't answer it today, drop us a line. We'll talk to you. This is Keith Tanner from Flyin Miata. Thanks for your attention.